Morning Year 5, it's Miss Hall here, and I'm going to be taking you through our Week 6 George Spicer Reads lesson, which relates to your working from home pack. So this week our theme is Food, Glorious Food, so we decided to choose the chapter Bruce Bogtrotter and the Cake from Matilda. Okay, so before we get started, let's just have a quick flick through our glossary. So we've got the word outrageous, which means shockingly bad, bold, or unusual. So you might say his outfit was outrageous, and this might be referring to someone who's wearing something very bold and unusual and doesn't look particularly great. So he's looking it's very outrageous. Or you could describe someone as behaving outrageously. So again, their behaviour would be shockingly bad. It would be quite extreme, quite bold, and again, not really how people would usually behave. And we've got the word ridiculous. Ridiculous means something extremely silly or unreasonable, absurd. That's a ridiculous thing to say. Of course, you don't have aliens as neighbours, for example. And then we've got a couple of words here. We've got breeches, which, as you can see in the picture below, they're a type of riding trouser. Breeches have been more modernised now, and they look more kind of like leggings, but this is sort of an old style type of breeches in this picture. And then we have a riding crop, which is a type of flexible whip used in riding horses. So at this point, I wonder if you could make a prediction who wears these breeches and who uses this riding crop. I think I've got quite a good idea. If you know the story Matilda, you might also have a good idea. Okay, so let's start off with the teacher aloud. How can she get away with it? Lavender said. I like the way the word away is in italics because it shows me that Lavender is feeling quite frustrated and that perhaps if she is referring to Miss Trunchbull, perhaps Miss Trunchbull has done something like this before, and perhaps it's quite a regular occurrence, and Lavender's starting to get quite frustrated and infuriated with the situation. How can she get away with it? Lavender said to Matilda. Surely the children go home and tell their mothers and fathers. I know my father would raise a terrific stink if I told him the headmistress had grabbed me by the hair and slung me over the playground fence. I like the phrase, my father would raise a terrific stink. So this isn't relating to smell, but this is suggesting that Lavender thinks if she told her father would be really cross about the situation. He wouldn't remain quiet. He'd come into the school and potentially confront the headmistress and might even get other parents involved. So he wouldn't just accept it and think this is okay. He'd really, really have a problem. He'd come in and he'd address this issue. I also like the word slung. I think it's effective because it suggests that Miss Trunchbull threw the poor girl with such a lack of care, almost as if she would be throwing a bit of rubbish away. No, he wouldn't, Matilda said, and I'll tell you why. He simply wouldn't believe you. Of course he would. He wouldn't, Matilda said. So we're starting to get a sense of Matilda's character here, and we're starting to get the impression that she's quite confident and forthcoming, and she's not afraid to stand up to her friend or disagree with her friend. He wouldn't, Matilda said, and the reason is obvious. Your story would sound too ridiculous to be believed, and that is the Trunchbull's great secret. So additionally, we're getting the impression that Matilda's intelligent and is noticing things that perhaps the other children are not. So she's on to Miss Trunchbull. She understands what Miss Trunchbull is doing, and she refers to it as her great secret. So she thinks perhaps that Trunchbull is quite clever in how she's behaving. She's suggesting that the parents wouldn't believe the children. I also like the way that the author gets the children referring to her as the Trunchbull. rather than Miss Trunchbull. I think it shows that they have a lack of respect for her. They wouldn't refer to her as Miss Trunchbull. The Trunchbull suggests that they think of her as some kind of beast or wild monster. What is? Lavender asked. Matilda said, never do anything by halves if you want to get away with it. Be outrageous. Go the whole hog. Make sure everything you do is so completely crazy, it's unbelievable. So here Matilda is elaborating on this great secret that she thinks Miss Trunchbull has, that she's very aware of what she's doing, that she is quite malicious in the fact that she's trying to behave in such an outrageous way that no parent would ever believe that a head teacher would usually act in this way. So actually what they probably think is that the children were making it up, and that this is how Miss Trunchbull gets away with doing what she does. In that case, Lavender said, Amanda's mother isn't going to cut her pigtails off. No, she isn't, Matilda said. Amanda will do it herself. You see if she doesn't. So this is referring to a previous part of the text in which I believe Miss Trunchbull asked Amanda, or told Amanda, that she needed to cut her pigtails off. However, Amanda's mother's not going to believe the story. If she came home and said, Miss Trunchbull said, I need to cut my pigtails off, Amanda's mother would think that's absolutely ridiculous. Stop being so silly. So actually what's going to happen is Amanda's going to have to do it herself, because she'd be so scared not to in case she got caught by Miss Trunchbull again. Do you think she's mad? Lavender asked. Who? The Trunchbull. I think this word who is quite interesting. It shows that Matilda doesn't automatically assume that Lavender's talking about Miss Trunchbull, and this gives the impression that perhaps Matilda doesn't think she's mad. Okay, so your turn. So let's read it together first of all, and then I'd like you to pause the video and have a little think about the parts that I've highlighted, and then we'll go through them together. So, no, I don't think she's mad, Matilda said, but she's very dangerous. Being in this school is like being in a cage with a cobra. You have to be very fast on your feet. They got another example of how dangerous headmistress could be on the very next day. During lunch, an announcement was made that the whole school should go into the assembly hall and be seated as soon as the meal was over. When all the 250 or so boys and girls were settled down in assembly, the Trunchbull marched onto the platform. None of the other teachers came in with her. She was carrying a riding crop in her right hand. She stood up there on centre stage in her green breeches, with legs apart and riding crop in hand, glaring at the sea of upturned faces before her. So I'd like you to pause the video and have a look at the highlighted phrases and have a little think about them. Do you think they're effective? What do they suggest? Okay. And then we will go through them in just a moment. Okay, so let's go through them together. No, I don't think she's mad, Matilda said, but she's very dangerous. I think that this suggests that she believes Trunchbull knows what she's doing, and that this is what makes her even more scary, that she's not just mad, she's actually being quite malicious. And this makes her very dangerous. Being in this school is like being in a cage with a cobra. You have to be very fast on your feet. So what did you think about this? I thought that it was effective the way the authors used figurative language here to compare the children's experience to being in a cage with a cobra. I thought that it's an effective comparison because it emphasises that being in a cage emphasises that they feel maybe trapped in school, and that it's not a safe place for them. And also a cobra is a dangerous snake that would cause harm to them and maybe strike at them unexpectedly and all of a sudden. So they need to constantly be on their toes, watching out for it and dodging it so they don't become its next victim. And I think this is a really effective comparison to Miss Trunchbull herself. Okay, if we then skim down, when all the 250 or so boys and girls were settled down in assembly, the Trunchbull marched onto the platform. So what did you think about this word marched? I thought it suggests that she's walking in quite an abrupt manner. She wants to appear quite strong and hard. If I think about how army officers march in a line, they're very straight-faced, very rigid, very regimented. And I get the impression that she means business. And at this point, she might be quite angry, and probably quite an unapproachable character. And then the last phrase, glaring at the sea of upturned faces. So again, this is another piece of figurative language. We've got a metaphor here. And I think it's effective. It emphasises the amount of children all sat close together and filling a large space to create a sea of children. I think that's quite an effective way of helping us get that picture into our minds. And the fact that their faces are upturned, I think, tells us a few things. It suggests that perhaps, one, they're too afraid not to look at her for fear of standing out, and being picked on by her. And also it suggests that perhaps they're very eager to find out why they have all been called to the hall. So they're looking up, waiting for Miss Trunchbull to make her announcement. Okay, in your pack this week, you're going to, I think your extension on day 2 is to do a bit of predicting. So I thought we could do a bit of predicting together here. So what's going to happen? Lavender whispered. I don't know, Matilda whispered back. Now, having read what we've read so far, can you make a prediction at this point? Why do you think that might happen next? Sorry, what do you think might happen next and why? So when we're predicting, we need to use what we've learned already. We need to use the text to make an educated guess. So we're not just going to be predicting random things, okay? That like there was a stampede of rhinoceroses charging through the hall. That would be very random. There's no evidence to back that up, and there's nothing that we've read so far that would suggest that, okay? So think about what we've read and try to make an educated guess, a prediction at this point of what do you think is going to happen next? Why have they been called into the hall? What do we already know about Miss Trunchbull? And use that to help guide your prediction. And you can use these sentence frames. I wonder if, because, I predict that, because, I imagine that, because, I think it will be set out, or the next part will be about because. Now, the key word here is because, and that means that you need to give reason, give evidence for your prediction. So as I said, don't just make it random, an educated guess, and back it up with evidence from the text. So pause the video, have a little think, and then I'll go through my prediction with you in just a moment. Okay, so perhaps you'd like to share your predictions with your class teacher on your Microsoft Teams chat wall, perhaps. So I'm going to go through my prediction now. So I predict that Miss Trunchbull is going to be pulling out a child from the hall, because I think we've learned that she's quite a bully and she's not very nice to the children. And we know that she's done things like this before, where she threw poor Amanda by the pigtails across the fence. So I think that what she's about to do might be quite outrageous in the same way, because of what we know about what Matilda said, how she behaves in such an outrageous way that if any of the children were to ever go home and tell their parents, they wouldn't believe her. So I think it's going to be a similar incident. Of course, we won't be able to elaborate what. Perhaps if we know the story, we might be able to, but that's not predicting, that's just retelling. So we have to pretend that we don't know the story. So based on what I've learned about Trunchbull so far, I predict that she's about to pull out one of the children and call them out for something that they have maybe done wrong that she is not happy with. And I think that she's going to deal with it in an outrageous manner, not the usual way a teacher might deal with a child that's been naughty. So that would be my prediction. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear your predictions. Before we end the lesson, We've got just a couple of practice questions here based on the text, so let's read on. The whole school waited for what was coming next. Bruce Bogtrotter, the Trunchbull barked suddenly. Where is Bruce Bogtrotter? A hand shot up among the seated children. Come up here, the Trunchbull shouted, and look smart about it. An 11-year-old boy who was decidedly large and round stood up and waddled briskly forward. He climbed up onto the platform. Stand over there, the Trunchbull ordered, pointing. The boy stood to one side. He looked nervous. He knew very well he wasn't up there to be presented with a prize. He was watching the headmistress. So question 1, what does the phrase waddled briskly and hand shot up tell us about how Bruce is feeling? And number 2, what does the phrase he knew very well he wasn't up there to be presented with a prize suggest? So again, pause the video, have a little think, and then we'll go through the answers together. Okay, so question 1. What does the phrase waddled briskly and hand shot up tell us about how Bruce is feeling? So if he's waddling briskly, the word that I'm focusing on here is briskly, because it shows us that he's walking or waddling in a very quick way. Okay, he's getting up there fast. And also hand shot up, this also tells us that his hand was raised quickly. Now, I think that these two phrases together suggest that perhaps he's feeling quite nervous and afraid that he's been called, and he knows not to dawdle for fear that it would make Trunchbull even more angry. So he realises he's been targeted, and I think he knows that he just needs to follow her instructions as best as possible and get up there quickly. He knows there'll be more trouble if he dilly-daddles or tries to hide in between the rest of the children. Okay, so I think it suggests that he's quite scared of Miss Trunchbull. And then number 2, what does the phrase "he very well knew he wasn't up there to be presented with a prize" suggest? So I think this phrase suggests that he's been in the school long enough to know what Miss Trunchbull's like, and he knows that he's not been called up to be awarded with a prize, which suggests that he's been called up there for a very different reason, and most probably a negative reason. He most probably realises at this point that he's done something wrong, or in Miss Trunchbull's opinion, he's done something wrong, and he's about to be pulled up on it and confronted, and perhaps be punished in some way by Miss Trunchbull. So this should lead you on quite nicely to the rest of your pack. So well done, and good luck with your questions. Bye.